Here's something your parents genuinely believe. Not kind of believe, not sort of believe. Genuinely, with their whole chest. That buying a house is always the smarter move. Not sometimes smarter. Not usually smarter. Always. And here's the wild part. For their generation, they were completely right. The advice worked. It built wealth. It was the single best financial decision millions of families ever made. So why are we spending the next 20 minutes proving they're wrong? Because the world they gave you that advice for no longer exists. And nobody told them. Let me take you back. It's 1987. Your dad is 28 years old. He's got a decent job. Let's say he's making $32,000 a year. That was solid money back then. Middle class. Comfortable. He walks into a bank. He wants to buy a house. The banker slides a sheet across the desk. $89,000. That's the price of a modest 3-bedroom home in a decent suburb. Now here's the part your dad loves to remind you of. He leans back at Thanksgiving dinner and says, "Son, interest rates were 10% back then. We had it hard too." And he's right. Rates were brutal. Sometimes 12%, sometimes 15%. In 1981, they hit 18.6%, the highest in modern American history. But here's what your dad forgets to mention. That $89,000 house, on his $32,000 salary, that's only 2.8 times his annual income. He put 20% down. His mortgage payment, even at 10% interest, was around $630 a month. That was about 24% of his take-home pay. Still inside the financial safety zone. And then something magical happened. Inflation came in hot through the late 80s and 90s. Wages grew. But more importantly, home values exploded. By the year 2000, that $89,000 house was worth around $220,000. By 2005, over $300,000. He bought an asset at 2.8 times his income, watched it triple in value, and paid it down with dollars that inflation made cheaper every year. The advice worked because the math worked. Now let me show you your math. It's 2024. You're 28. Same age your dad was. You're making $72,000 a year. Sounds like a lot more money. But let's look at the house. $430,000 for a modest 3-bedroom home in a decent suburb, not New York, not San Francisco, just a normal mid-tier American city. That's nearly 6 times your income. And in major cities, 10 times, 12 times, sometimes 14 times. Your dad's ratio was 2.8. Yours is almost double that. Before we even talk about the mortgage, 20% down on a $430,000 house is $86,000, almost your entire annual salary, saved from scratch, while paying rent, student loans, and trying to live your life. And let's say you somehow have it. At today's interest rates, your mortgage payment is around $2,200 a month. Add taxes and insurance. Now you're spending close to 40% of your take-home pay on housing. Same advice, completely different math. Now, if you've ever had this conversation with your parents, there's a sentence you've definitely heard before. Renting is throwing money away. And honestly, that sentence might be one of the most financially misleading things ever said at kitchen tables across America. Because yes, when you rent, your payment builds zero equity. But when you own, a huge portion of your money also builds zero equity. Mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, maintenance, especially maintenance. Nobody warns you about maintenance. The general rule is 1% of your home's value every year. On a $430,000 home, that's over $4,000 annually. Some years it's nothing. Some years your roof explodes and suddenly you owe $18,000. And in the early years of a mortgage, Most of your payment goes to interest, not ownership. So when people say renting is throwing money away, they conveniently ignore the thousands of dollars homeowners also spend every year that disappear forever. Now, look, I'm not saying homeownership is a scam. It's not. But the conversation is way more complicated than most people admit. Because the real question isn't rent versus buy. The real question is opportunity cost. Let's say you have $86,000 saved, enough for a down payment. You now have two choices. Choice A, put it into a house. Choice B, keep it invested. Now this is where things get interesting. Imagine two people, same age, same city, same salary. Person A buys the house. She puts $86,000 down on a $430,000 home. Her monthly housing cost ends up around $3,200. Person B rents a similar place for $2,100 a month. And instead of using his $86,000 as a down payment, he invested into a low-cost index fund. Then he invests the difference every month too, about $1,100. Now, before the real estate crowd starts typing angry comments. Yes, homes appreciate. Absolutely. So let's include that. Let's assume the house appreciates 4% per year, and the stock market returns 10% annually. Historical averages. We run this for 20 years. After 20 years, Person A's home is worth around $940,000. After paying down the mortgage, her equity is roughly $560,000. That's incredible wealth. Real wealth. Life-changing wealth. But Person B, his investment account ends up around $1.4 million. Why? Because compound interest is absurdly powerful, especially when you consistently invest the difference. Now, before you screenshot that and send it to your parents, there's another side to this. Because Person A owns something Person B doesn't. A home. Stability. No landlord can suddenly raise the rent. No surprise move because the building got sold. Her kids stay in the same school district. She can renovate the kitchen, get a dog, plant a tree, and eventually, her mortgage disappears. Person B will still be paying rent decades later. So what's the actual answer? Here's the truth nobody on the internet wants to say. There is no universal answer. Buying a house is amazing under the right conditions, and terrible under the wrong ones. Buying makes sense when you plan to stay in the same city for at least 7 years. When your total housing payment stays under roughly 28% of your income, when you're buying a city with real long-term demand, and when you still have emergency savings left over after the down payment. If all four of those boxes are checked, buy the house. Seriously, the math probably works. But if you're buying because you're scared of missing out, that's not a financial plan. If you're buying because your parents keep pressuring you, that's not a financial plan either. And if you're buying because renting is throwing money away, you now know that sentence is incomplete. The truth is your parents weren't wrong. Not really. Their advice worked brilliantly in the world they lived in. Homes were cheaper relative to income. Wages kept rising. And the housing market had 40 years of momentum behind it. They played the game with the cards they were dealt. And they won. But you were dealt different cards. And playing their strategy with your cards doesn't automatically make sense. So what do you actually do with this? First, stop treating this like an argument to win. Your parents gave you that advice because they wanted security for you. They watched people buy homes and retire comfortably. They watched renters struggle later in life. The advice came from love. It just came from a different economic reality. Your job isn't to reject their advice completely. Your job is to update it. Run your own numbers. Use a rent versus buy calculator. Look at your income, your city, your timeline. Build your emergency fund before you even think about buying. And if the math works, then buy with confidence. Because the goal was never homeownership. The goal was financial security. Your parents understood that. They just found it through a door that, for your generation, costs twice as much to open. If this video made you think a little differently about the biggest financial decision of your life, hit the like button. And if you know someone whose parents are aggressively sending them Zillow listings right now, share this with them. You might save them $86,000. Next week, we're diving deeper into the actual rent versus buy calculator, city by city, where buying still makes undeniable sense, and where investing the difference might be the smarter move. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if your parents are watching this right now, thank you for the advice, for the sacrifice, for wanting better for us. We're just updating the spreadsheet. See you next week.